This was a courtroom scene in Colombo, the capital of Sri Lanka, on July 24, 2025. The plaintiff in this case was the government of Sri Lanka, the defendant, the shipping company Express Feeders, and several related parties. This company owned the container ship MV Express Pearl that caught fire. After days of heated debate between lawyers representing both sides, the Supreme Court of Sri Lanka finally delivered its verdict. This Singapore-based shipping company was ordered to pay $1 billion in compensation to the Sri Lankan government. Yes, that is the largest amount of money that a shipping company has had to pay for an accident in the past 2 decades. But why such an enormous figure? To understand that, we need to turn back the clock to May 19th, 2021, one day before the container ship Express Pearl went up in flames. At this time, the ship was traveling on the route from Hazira Port, India to Colombo Port, Sri Lanka. At the deck area, all eyes and attention of the crew were on the container with registration number FSCU7 712264. Something was terribly wrong. Over the past 5 days, the liquid inside this container, nitric acid, had been continuously leaking into the hatch cover area number 2 at an estimated rate of 0.5 to 1 liter per hour. The corrosive fumes filled the air, and streaks of light orange smoke were also continuously coming from this container. In that situation, the captain and the responsible company quickly sent a request to urgently dock at Colombo Port to offload the leaking container. However, the port area was currently under the influence of a Category 4 hurricane with maximum sustained winds of 135 miles per hour. Therefore, at 11:48 p.m. on May 19, the Express Pearl dropped anchor about 9 nautical miles off the port, still within its outer limits, awaiting clearance to dock after 6 days. 1:30 a.m. on May 20, the fire alarm from hold number 2 began to sound. The orange smoke was getting thicker, the smell from leaking container was getting worse. Once again, the captain sent out an emergency request to the port control, but it was not approved. At around 12 noon on the same day, the situation worsened. Small fires were now visible inside hold number 2. The crew released all fixed CO2 into the compartment, hoping to suffocate the flames, but the fire refused to die down. The black smoke columns continued to grow larger. On May 21, distress signals were received. Many rescue ships from the Colombo Port Control Center quickly assisted in extinguishing the fire. A Navy Bell 212 helicopter was also mobilized to dropping bags of dry chemical powder over the burning containers. With a total of 1,486 containers on board, including 445 filled with plastic pellets and rubber, plus 25 tons of nitric acid, various chemicals, and cosmetic products, combined with rough weather, making the rescue work very difficult. By June 2, 2 weeks after the fire began, the vessel started to sink while being towed into deeper waters. It carried down with it 297 tons of heavy fuel oil and 51 tons of marine oil, posing an extreme risk of an oil spill. What's worse, during the sinking process, tons of nitric acid, plastic pellets, and other chemicals continuously spilled into the sea and drifted with the current, causing one of the worst environmental disasters ever in Sri Lanka. Millions of plastic pellets mixed with seawater have washed ashore on the southwest coast of Sri Lanka, a popular tourist destination in the country. Plastic pellets the size of rice grains can easily be mistaken for food by birds or marine life. This has caused hundreds of sea turtles, dolphins, fish, and birds to die and become stranded on the shore. Over time, these plastic pellets break down into smaller pieces, called microplastics, which are harder to detect and control, leaving a long-lasting scar on the marine ecosystem. A fishing ban was imposed within an 80-kilometer radius of the wreck. Thousands of local families who depended on fishing for their livelihood and daily food supply were left without income. And yet, all this represents only the visible part of the tragedy. Most of the remaining toxic cargo still lies at the bottom of the sea, turning the wreck into a ticking time bomb for marine life. To solve this problem, the Sri Lankan government had to hire Shanghai Salvage Company, a Chinese firm, to remove the wreck and clear the debris from the seabed, an effort that cost millions and took years. It was not until the 10th of January 2024 that the last pieces of the ship were removed from Sri Lankan waters. $1 billion may sound like a large sum for a shipping company, but it is tiny compared to the long-term damage this disaster has caused. More importantly, the country is almost unrealistic to receive such a sum due to the lack of a solid legal framework, and the legal battle for compensation is still ongoing with no end in sight. Legal battles over maritime disaster compensations often drag on for years, sometimes even decades. That was exactly the case with the lawsuit between the Spanish government and the London P&I Club, the insurer of the ill-fated oil tanker Prestige. On the 13th of November 2002, the oil tanker Prestige was en route from the port of Ventspils, Latvia, to Gibraltar, Spain, when it encountered rough weather. Large waves repeatedly hitting the ship caused a 5-meter wide hole in its starboard side, causing the ship to list and start leaking oil. At this time, the ship was about 30 kilometers off the coast of Cabo Finisterre, Galicia in Spain. In this situation, the captain requested refuge in a nearby Spanish port, but the request was denied. Then, on the 19th of November 2002, while being towed far from shore, the ship broke in two and sank about 260 kilometers west of Vigo, Spain. This released roughly 63,200 tons of heavy fuel oil into the sea, triggering one of the worst environmental disasters in the history of Spain and Portugal. More than 2,300 kilometers of coastline were contaminated with oil. Around 22,000 dead birds were found shortly after the incident. The total economic loss for Spain's fishing industry alone was estimated at $296 million between 2002 and 2006. In November 2017, a Spanish court ordered the London P&I Club to pay $1 billion, the maximum coverage amount stated in the ship's insurance policy. However, to this day, more than 20 years after the incident, this lawsuit has yet to reach a final verdict. For the people and communities directly affected, justice and compensation are still a distant promise. When we talk about catastrophic oil spills, it would be remiss not to mention the accident involving 2 Russian tankers in the Kirch Strait in December 2024. 4,000 tons of mazout oil, equivalent to nearly 30,000 barrels of oil, spilled into the sea, polluting 475 kilometers of coastline, and 158,000 tons of contaminated sand were collected. These are the initial damage statistics immediately after the incident. Thousands of volunteers reportedly joined cleanup efforts around Anapa and the Crimean coastline. During this process, 146 people were rushed to the emergency room after helping to clean up the oil. And tragically, a 17-year-old university student with asthma fell ill and died before the ambulance arrived. Dozens of seabirds and marine mammals were also found dead along the oil-soaked shores. The cause of this incident was the age of both Volga-Neft tankers. They were both more than 50 years old, designed originally for river and coastal transport, and not built to withstand waves higher than 2 meters. On the day of the incident, the Kirch Strait area was stormy, with winds gusting up to 37 miles per hour, causing large waves to crash and damage the structure of the 2 ships. These are warnings to other individuals and organizations that are using old, poorly maintained ships to continue operating. That is exactly the deadly trap in the middle of the ocean. The final environmental disaster we'll be covering in this video comes from a collision that occurred right at the jetty at Pasir Panjang Port, Singapore. On the afternoon of June 14, 2024, the fuel tanker Marine Honor was loading cargo at the pier when it was struck broadside by the dredger Vox Maxima. The collision caused a fuel tank to rupture, spilling more than 400 tons of oil from the Marine Honor into the sea. A portion of that oil drifted toward the southern coast of Singapore, contaminating beaches at Labrador Nature Reserve, Sentosa, and East Coast Park. The spill brought business and recreational activities along Singapore's southern shoreline to a standstill. In response, the Singaporean government mobilized over 100 workers who labored for weeks to collect and contain the slicks, a massive effort to restore the city-state's coastline to its pristine condition.
Oh my, look at that. It's really thick.
Behind every explosion, every oil slick drifting across the ocean, lies a series of human missteps. Negligence, indifference by port management, cost-cutting that pushes ships beyond their limits. And when disaster strikes, the consequences are measured not just in dollars, but in the silent deaths of creatures, the collapse of livelihoods, and the scars left on entire ecosystems. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. We've got more wild water action coming your way soon, so stay tuned. Catch you in the next one. Bye.